Evening. This morning we talked about diabetes. We talked about some very simple principles that we have seen help many people to conquer their diabetes, and that's good news. We also talked about heart disease, and we also showed how that also can be conquered. And this evening we're going to be talking about weight loss, and we're also going to be talking about sleep. Last meeting, before we go to sleep, we'll be looking at the principles involved in sleep, how you can improve your sleep, how you can also rewire your brain. And by the way, on Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I'm going to show you how you can rewire your brain. And that's the good news. The research is showing us that we can rewire our brain right up until the day we die. That's good news, isn't it? Because it all starts at headquarters. But we're going to be looking at weight loss now. 63% of Australians are either overweight or obese. I think that America's not far behind. And I say far behind because I know that Australia has taken over America. But when I'm in Alabama and I speak at a health school there, I'll be there next week, and I go to the little town of Loveland, I have to tell you, I think that they're bigger than our big. They're very large people in those little towns. So my inquiry always is why. And so the first thing I'm going to look at, and there are a few factors that come together to cause this, and that number one is the food that we're eating. When we looked at the liver, we looked at this. And this morning when we looked at diabetes, we looked at this. So we're going to look at it again in relation to weight. And it's the high carbohydrate diet that many people are eating today. I'm still mastering the art of saying one thing and writing another. So bread is very common. Cereal, there's a whole aisle devoted to cereal. And many people having bread and cereal for breakfast, by mid-morning they're wanting something else, so they reach for, and we're just going to say cakes, etc., because if we say everything, there's not enough room on the board for it. When you go into muffins and croissants and donuts and pasties and pies and pastry, etc., etc., etc. So we're just going to put etc. Also, pasta. I'm a fifth generation Australian Scottish descent. I didn't know what pasta and pizza was till I was about 18. So what did I grow up with? Sausages or chops, mashed potatoes, frozen peas or beans every single night of the week, except for Sunday when Mum would do a roast lamb. And everyone I knew ate like that. Our relatives ate like that, the neighbours ate like that. As a fifth generation Australian, I grew up in a little Presbyterian church. Everyone in the church ate like that. I came to the conclusion as a child that everyone in the whole world ate like that, but it's not quite true, is it? And when I was about 16, I had a boyfriend who was about 19, and he had a friend who was a vegetarian. I'd never heard of such a thing. Had never even heard of brown bread. So this was real traditional Australian. Rice, I'd never had rice. I don't think I went to a Chinese restaurant till I was about 18, and that's the first time I ate rice. Potatoes, well, we ate potatoes every meal. And last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallised acid extracted from the sugarcane plant. And as we have looked at this, we've also acknowledged that I don't think anyone chose to eat that way. It's just fast. It's just there. And we're such a fast society today. Here it is. And we showed how when all of these things break down in the body, they break down to the singular structure of glucose. Our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. And anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down into tiny little particles, then it's absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you and me. The Bible says in Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood, because it is the blood that carries the nutrients here to the CBD. The central business district of the human body is the inside workings of the cell. In fact, one writer called the blood the river of life because of what it carries. And so it brings the glucose. The glucose goes in under the action of insulin, goes through the 20-step pathway. I'm sure everyone's very familiar with the inside workings of the cell now. Yes? And that 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. Isn't that why we eat? To get glucose, to run our energy cycles. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into what's called the powerhouse, called the powerhouse because these 8 little chemical reactions, this 8-step pathway, delivers impressive 36 units of energy. And the reason why the 8-step pathway gives 36 units of energy is the presence of oxygen. So this is called the aerobic pathway. Whereas this pathway is called the anaerobic pathway because it does not use oxygen. It produces energy by the process of fermentation. So when we eat the carbohydrates, they're broken down to glucose. The first place the glucose is sent is to the cell. The second place it is sent, because only so much can go through the energy cycles, then it is stored as glycogen. We looked at this morning and how that's particularly useful for the diabetic, having these little, well, it's useful for everyone because they're little molecules of glucose sitting in the muscle cell. And that's why the best place to, or the best time to exercise is early morning. Because in early morning, when you're starting to move, some people say, well, how are we going to get fuel to actually exercise? It's your glycogen stores already sitting in your muscle cell. And when the cell needs it, it's plucked and it's released. Amazing process. But on the high carbohydrate diet, and this is what a lot of people don't realise, especially when people go on a weight loss diet and stop all the fat, yeah? Fat-free this, fat-free that, fat-free, fat-free, fat-free. And yet what are they eating? Lots of carbohydrates. Do you know fat gives the feeling of satiation or satisfaction? And the best weight loss diet is a diet that stops your hunger. And fat stops the hunger. So what's happening on this high carbohydrate diet? People have eliminated the fat and they're eating lots and lots and lots of this, not realising that that excess glucose, once we've filled up the energy cycle, we've filled up the glycogen stores, and so now the body sends it to the fat cells. And on this high carbohydrate diet, what's happening to Americans and Australians? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, it's one of the most dangerous fats because what the body does is it stores it in the probably areas of the body that's not used a lot, maybe the arms, the belly, the hips, the thighs, and then when that gets all filled up, then it starts to go to the internal organs, weighing them down. And in the book Wheat Belly, notice the title of the book, Wheat Belly, Dr. William Davis, he shows that sugar particularly, sugar and the hybridised wheat, and the hybridised wheat is found in most breads, cakes, cereals, pastas, pizzas. Because it gets the blood sugar level up so high, so fast, as we looked at this morning, then very quickly it's dumped as a visceral fat on the belly. And in the book Wheat Belly, I think the word wheat belly he uses on just about every page, showing this process. And another fact, another very misunderstood fact, is that glucose burns at 4 calories per gram. whereas fat, it burns at 9 calories per gram. Now this piece of information, which is fact, is in just about every weight loss book as proof that if you want to lose weight, don't eat the fat. It's going to give you more than twice the calories. But what the people don't understand is what a calorie is. A calorie is a unit of energy. And if you want a high energy food, what do you eat? Fat. It's going to give you more than twice the units of energy compared to glucose. But if you're eating more calories than you can burn, yes, it's going to be stored. That's why one of the best things that you can do for weight loss is to eat breakfast like a king. I have to admit that I think I eat lunch like a king and breakfast like a queen, but whatever. And sometimes the queen eats as much as the king. Lunch like a queen, and then tea like a pauper, or you call it supper, yeah? I think that when I say tea, you probably think I mean a cup of tea, yeah? But we call an evening meal tea. And as one lady said to me, well, what do paupers eat? I said, sometimes nothing. What many people are doing today, and I see it in many countries I go to, they eat breakfast like the pauper, they eat lunch like the pauper, and the tea or the supper is the king and the queen together. That's like going on a journey, and you start your long journey and you go to the gas station, we call it a petrol station, call it a gas station, and just put a little bit in. And then an hour later, put a little bit more in. And then an hour later, put a little bit more in. And then you've done this all day. And then you finally get to your destination, you go into the gas station and you fill your tank and then park it in the garage. How much sense does that make? And yet that's what most people are doing. Little bit here, little bit there, little bit there. End of the day, king and the queen together, and the body says, finally, we've got some nourishment. And then they say, oh no, they've gone to bed. So what are we going to do with all these calories, these units of energy? We're just going to have to store them. It's really only probably the last 100 years that the main meal has been had at the end of the day. In fact, traditionally, the main meal was always in the middle of the day, especially before electricity, because they didn't have the light at night and it was just more convenient. I was talking to a man who grew up in a little English village. So I was talking to him about 18 years ago, and then he was in his 60s. And he said, the schools closed down, the mines and the businesses closed down, and everyone used to go home and have their main meal. And he said at night we'd have bread and dripping. Well, that was considered something like. So in many cultures you will see that traditionally the main meal was always had in the middle of the day. But again, I don't think anyone planned it. It's just this fast society. And some people say, it's the only time I've got time. Well, there's wonderful things called slow cookers. And one mother said to me, I put my millet on at night, so by morning, when I get up, there it is, hot, ready to eat. She said, I wash my slow cooker, and then I put my soaked beans that I've rinsed and brought to the boil and rinsed again, put them in, put the vegetables, and put the slow cooker on again. She's a homeschool mum. She says, because I feed the children so well in the morning, how does she feed them? She feeds them a high fibre diet. All your plant foods have fibre. She feeds them generous proteins. So what are the proteins? Legumes, nuts, seeds, they're your best proteins. And healthy fats. Healthy fats are found in your nuts, your seeds, your coconut oil, olive oil. They're the two oils that have stood the test of time. Yeah, they've been used for centuries. And when white man went to the South Pacific Islands, He said, stop eating the coconut oil. It's going to cause you to be obese. It's going to give you heart disease. It's going to give you diabetes, cancer. And they all said, what's that? And they've been eating the coconut oil for centuries. But they listened to the white man. I was on the Fiji Islands. Do you know, before the white man came, cannibalism was pretty big. You know, there were some scary spiritual practices that they used to partake of. Sometimes if a child happened to walk in an area that was considered sacred, that child had to be thrown in the river to given to the spirits. You know, there were a lot of crazy things there. So the Fijians were freed from many harmful practices. So they listened to the white man. But they could have taught the white man how to eat. So the white man said, stop eating the coconut, it's going to give you all these problems. So they listened. And then white man introduced 5 lethal whites. White sugar, white rice, white flour, white refined salt and white cow's milk. They stopped the valuable white, the coconut, and brought in the 5 lethal whites. And if you go to the South Pacific Islands today, you will find diabetes, you will find heart disease, you will find obesity. I was in the Cook Islands a few years ago. Wonderful place. When I arrived, they just put lathes and big floral arrangements all around my head, all around me. They're very warm, very welcoming. You can go around the whole island in about an hour. And I was teaching basic health principles, and I was surprised how large the people are. You see, the bread shops and the cake shops have come in. And I know in the Fiji Islands, hot bread shops are open till 11 o'clock at night. And anyone who walks past that shop, and I think we all know the lovely smell of cooked bread. Oh, and they are big. They're obese, they have got disease, not because of the coconut, but because they've stopped the coconut. You see, it's not the fat that makes you fat. It's actually these refined carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are not bad. What a relief. We like them. The problem is when they're overdone and refined. That's the problem. When they're overdone and refined. So you don't have to stop the carbohydrates. You just have to make sure they're not overdone, they're not refined, and ideally use replacements for the wheat. Because as we looked at in diabetes this morning, in the hybridisation of the wheat, they change the starch structure and it gets the blood sugar level up higher than even refined sugar. Ooh. And so changing the times that you eat, that makes a big difference. And changing the food you eat makes a huge difference. I was reading the testimony of a chef. He was large, obese. And he said he used to eat little bits all day long. All day long. That's all he'd eat, little bits all day long. So he decided to do an experiment. He decided to get all the little bits and put it into 3 meals. He knew the old saying, and have most of it at breakfast and lunch. And he lost a lot of weight, and he ate the same amount of food. And he ate the same type of food. He just changed the times when he did it. Because he gave his stomach a break. You see, it's like my husband. He says, I had a 2-hour job to do in the office today. He said, at the end of the day, it's 8 hours later and I still haven't done it. Because he said someone would ring up. Someone would come into the office. I kept getting interrupted. Has that ever happened to you? That's exactly what happens to digestion. When we put food in our stomach, we should now leave it. Let it do its work. After about an hour and a half, 2 hours, start sipping on some water. Then you don't water down your hydrochloric acid. It takes 3.5 to 4 hours to digest a meal. If a person has a meal of watermelon, that's probably gone in about 2 hours. But when someone has a balanced meal, which is shown here, it takes about 3.5 to 4 hours to digest. And then the stomach loves a 1 hour rest. Let your stomach have a rest between meals. And in that rest time, it has time to revive and restore and replace the digestive enzymes it used at the last meal. And that's why the time-restricted eating, we've talked about this a couple of times, time-restricted eating is basically a modern name for this. Time-restricted eating, it's from the intermittent fasting, the 5-2 diet. A lot of people are familiar with that. Dr. Michael Mosley, in his book Fast Diet, he goes into the research showing why this is so effective. It's eating twice in a 24-hour period. They suggest eating a large meal at 1 and another meal at 7. But I was talking to one girl and she said, I'm fading by 10 in the morning. And she said, and I can't sleep at night because I've got so much food in my stomach. When we go to sleep, our stomach wants to sleep. So it's far superior to go back to the old adage that's been around for so many years, probably hundreds of years, that we eat breakfast as our main meal, that we have a main meal in the middle of the day, and then if anything's eaten at night, make it very light. Now, if a worker has a breakfast at 6 a.m. and then has a meal at 12 o'clock, they may need something at night. But if they have the meal at 8 and at 2 or at 9 and at 3, then it's very easy not to eat at night. So you've just got to work out what works for you. One lady said to me, she said, I give my children a really substantial breakfast, and we'll look at illustration of meals in a minute. Should I give them a really substantial breakfast? She said, I just give them an orange for lunch. And she said, and when they come home at 3:30, and by the way, how much lunch do kids eat at school? They just want to play, don't they? So she gives them something light, and when they get home, they're hungry. How many kids get home hungry and want to eat, and then they're not wanting to eat their evening meal, and it's too late anyway? So she said, when I see that school bus come, she said, I got the table set. The kids come in, they're hungry, and have the meal there. She said it works so well. She said they never used to eat much at night because they had so much when they got home from school. But husband doesn't come home till maybe 5 or 6, and often he wants quiet. So he's very happy to just eat quietly by himself. And maybe the lady who wants to lose weight, she'll sit with her husband and drink a peppermint tea, or maybe she'll just have a bowl of salad. One lady said, but Barbara, that's when my family's together, my teenagers, my husband. I said, well, just make it a lighter meal, make it soup. Make it a bowl of soup and crackers. Crackers digest easily, much easier than bread. So it all depends. See, some of my boys, they go to the gym, they have breakfast at 6, they have another meal at midday, and then they have a big meal at night, then they go to the gym. So, you know, that works for them. So you're the doctor. You've got to work out what works for you. But that's the basic principle, having the main meal at the beginning of the day. What the researchers have found, Dr. Atkins found this. Remember Dr. Atkins, you know, way back in the 80s? And he first made this probably most famous. He's one of the first ones that officially blew the whistle on the dangers of the high carbs. And I think his story is very interesting. I was never interested in reading his book because I eat plants. And I don't say I'm a vegan because I've been in some circles. In fact, I was in a conference probably last year, and for dessert they had carrot cake. And, oh, it looked nice. And then they had this white fluff on top. And I said, what's that? And they said, oh, it's vegan. And I said, I know cow's cream. I know coconut cream. What's that? And then they bought this spray can. And you press the button and this white fluff comes out. Do you know that chemicals are vegan? Do you know that sugar's vegan? And I said, I'll just have the carrot cake, thanks. I like to know what's going in me. So I actually don't say vegan because, I don't know, some people are reading some of this stuff. I don't know whether you'd even call it food, but vegan's vegan. So I say I'm plant. So I eat plants. So I was not really interested in reading Dr. Atkins' book because everyone says it's just meat, dairy, cream, butter, cheese, eggs. That's what his diet is. So I thought, well, I'm not interested in that because I don't eat that. But we had a man come and do our program. This would be maybe 18 years ago now. And he said, I know you're not going to like it, Barbara, but I do very well on the Atkins diet. And when I go off the Atkins diet, I go down. Now, every good health professional, what will they do? They will listen. So I can't argue against that. And I want to know why. Why does this man do so well on the Atkins diet? So I was intrigued. And then about that time, maybe a fortnight later or 2 weeks later, we had another guy do our program. He's 44, fit, but he had a lot of allergies. And on the second day, remember we do our juice days Monday, Tuesday? So on Tuesday, 2 o'clock, I get a call. They said, quickly, Barbara, Anton needs to speak to you. I said, what's the matter, Anton? He said, I'm not doing well. He said, I feel terrible, I'm lightheaded, I'm feeling nauseous. My body says it needs protein. I said, okay, because what have I got to do? I've got to listen. So I made him up a protein drink. At that stage, we weren't giving protein drinks to our guests. I didn't understand the 3 phases of the liver detox at that stage. It's actually only been known probably since 2000. So I gave him a protein drink. I saw him 10 minutes later. He said, thanks, that's good. So again, my mind starts to work. Why did that man go well on the Atkins diet? Why did that man need protein? And then the next piece of information in the equation, I was staying at a friend's house and I was staying in the spare room, and when I woke up in the morning, there's the bookcase at the end of the bed, and I love reading. I'm an avid reader. So my eyes are going through, and there was one book that seemed to just jump out at me, Dr. Atkins' New Revolutionary Diet. Righto, I said, I'll look at it. Do you know, I couldn't put it down. It's a fascinating book. His research and his story is very interesting. I went out that day and I bought his book. And this is his story, Dr. Atkins. He said he was a GP, late 40s, putting on a bit of excess weight. He knew his science. He knew that carbohydrates stored as fat, so he decided to do an experiment on himself. He decided to stop all carbohydrates. And he theorised that if he stopped all carbohydrates, his body would start to live on his fat stores. So what did he eat? He chose foods that had no carbohydrate. So his diet was high in protein, meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs, that's a lot of protein. Fat, meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs, that's a lot. But something else surprised me that you never hear about. He ate 3 cups of vegetables a day, and 1 cup had to be greens. And so there was the fibre. The weight just fell off him. He theorised right. He wasn't giving carbohydrates to his body, so, well, hardly any, a little bit in the vegetables. So his body started to live on his fat stores. The weight started to drop off him. He was never hungry because these are the 3 foods that give the feeling of satiation, satisfaction. He had lots of energy because your liver can convert protein and fat to glucose if it needs it, and it can break down your fat stores to give you glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis, creating glucose from the fat stores. Has he found the perfect diet? Never hungry, lots of energy, weight's falling off him, so he started to put some of his patients on this. It is estimated that 11 million people were helped by his diet. His book was #1 on the New York Times best-selling book list 4 years running. This guy demands some attention. But the problem is that after a while, some of his patients were developing arthritis. because this is a high acid food. In fact, I had a man come to me wanting a consultation when I was in New York a few years ago. He said, I used to be one of Dr. Atkins' patients. He said, I'm a vegetarian, I'm an Adventist, but I was getting overweight, I was getting diabetes, heart disease, so I went to Dr. Atkins, because he's a very famous doctor. And Dr. Atkins, he said, was a very gracious man. He said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to stop this high carbohydrate diet. So he said, I started eating meat. I didn't eat a lot. I had a lot of vegetables. He said, I didn't get diabetes. He said, my heart problems all resolved. He said, the weight dropped. But he said, I'm getting arthritis. And he said, you are the first nutritionist that hasn't totally slammed Atkins. I'm interested. I said, well, Atkins' theory was correct. It's what I have shown you today. But what you can do superior to Atkins. You can do the plant proteins. You can do the plant fats. Dr. Atkins, on his first stage, he got people down to 20 grams of starch, carbohydrates a day. Do you know there's no need to go that low? All you need to do is greatly reduce the carbohydrates, ideally stop the wheat, eat more vegetables, eat more legumes, nuts and seeds, and you can get a similar result. Because of the results that he was getting, and by the way, his cancer patients were going into remission, people with high cholesterol were coming back to normal. Did everyone hear that? And his patients were eating meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. And what are people told to get their cholesterol levels down? They've got to stop the meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. So Atkins threw a spanner in the nutrition world's wheel, and it needed the spanner thrown into that wheel. And the only reason his patients got away with it for so long is the 3 cups of vegetables a day, which have an alkalizing effect. But the beauty of the plant proteins, it's much cleaner burning fuel. It doesn't leave an acid waste like the protein does. And when I was consulting with this man, he said to me, I believe if Dr. Atkins had read the China study, Atkins would have become a vegetarian. What an interesting comment. So you can get those results, but you can do it on a plant diet, as long as you do the legumes. And so many people say, oh, legumes, you've got to soak them, you've got to cook them. Well, when you go home tonight, just fill up the saucepan and fill it up with lentils. In the morning, rinse it well, bring it to the boil, rinse it again, put it in your slow cooker. There's lots of shortcuts. Or soak a whole lot, rinse heaps of them and then put them in snap lock bags in the freezer. Then you just pull it out, cook them. There's lots of shortcuts. And you can get organic beans in tins. Just make sure you bring them to the boil and rinse them very well. So it's easy, it need not be difficult. You see, animal protein, it burns at, so let's look at protein. Animal protein, only 58% is burnt as fuel. So that's a 42% waste. That's the acid waste. And that's what Dr. Colin Campbell found in his book, The China Study. He could switch cancer cells on and off, and we looked at this briefly when we looked at cancer on the first night. Because it's an acid waste, and cancer thrives in an acid environment. We looked at that. Whereas plant protein, it's a lot cleaner burning fuel. It doesn't have that acid waste. So with plant protein, you're getting up to about 80% easy is burnt as fuel. That's a big difference. So your plant protein is a superior protein. What Atkins found, and I found this interesting, he found that these 3 food groups are the essential food groups. Fibre is essential because the colon needs to be swept. We looked at that when we looked at the colon, when we looked at the waste disposal organs. Protein's essential because the crossword bands, remember we looked at the DNA on the first night, it's made up of amino acids. Amino acids is a breakdown from the protein we eat. And it's amino acids that builds the new cells in the body. And 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is protein. That's essential. Fat is essential. The fat-free diet is a dangerous diet. There are fats that'll kill and there are fats that'll heal. And because there are some killer fats, they've all been dumped in the same basket. What are the killer fats? The altered fats. You see, for centuries, people used the coconut oil and the olive oil. They can be extracted from the flesh of the plant. But those hard seeds, they couldn't really get the oils out until they developed high heat chemical equipment to extract oil from hard seeds. And because they use chemicals and heat, they destroy the oils immediately. So there's clear plastic bottles that have got sunflower oil, peanut oil, soy oil. Don't touch them. They're the oils that can help to damage the arterial wall. They're the dangerous oils. And your deep-fried foods. If you do fry any food, it should be always in a saturated fat because saturated fat is heat-resistant and light-resistant. The heat doesn't destroy them. Yeah?
What about avocado oil?
What about avocado oil? Avocado oil has some saturated fat and some monounsaturated fat. So if you do have avocado oil, it should be first cold pressed. Your brain is the fattiest organ in the body. It must have fat. The myelin sheath that is around the arm that comes out of the nerve cell, it's mostly fat. If someone's on a fat-free diet, on cholesterol-lowering medication, because that fatty substance is mostly cholesterol and it protects the nerve cell. So if someone's on a fat-free diet, cholesterol-lowering medication, and got a mouthful of mercury and eating fish every day to try and get some more protein, but they're having huge amounts of mercury and big exposure to chemicals, well, that's disaster. There's your Parkinson's disease, there's your multiple sclerosis, there's your dementia and your Alzheimer's because then the brain cells are getting damaged. So we need to be having nice amounts of fats. How much? Well, not much. It's a very concentrated food. Maybe a teaspoon a meal, maybe not even that. You don't need much. I don't know about you, but I couldn't drink a cup of oil. No, not attractive. But you would be surprised how much oil a person is consuming when they eat a whole meal of, say, fish and chips and scallops, all that fried food. They're almost consuming nearly, probably between half a cup and 3/4 of a cup of fat. And it's damaged fat. That's the fat that is dangerous. There's no doubt about that. But because there are dangerous fats, unfortunately, they've all been classified as dangerous, but they are not. And we need some. Our brain needs some. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat, except for the brain cell, 70% fat. So these are the essential food groups. And what Dr. Atkins showed, and he went into the medical journals and he found confirmation on this, that the non-essential food group is carbohydrates. And how many people are overdoing the non-essential and missing out on the essential? And what's the result? Obesity, heart disease, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and Mensa be your food. Now remember, carbohydrates aren't bad. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. It's only when they're overdone and refined. So number 2 for weight loss, low carbohydrate. Low carb, high fibre. Generous protein and healthy fats. I gave the story this morning when I talked about diabetes of Jim, the guy who was a type 1 diabetic and got off all his medication. And do you remember the weight loss he experienced? Quite phenomenal. And it wasn't just that he was eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen and tea like a pauper. It wasn't just that he was on a low carbohydrate, high fibre, generous protein and healthy fat diet. It was also the fact that he began to drink more water. He was having 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. And when you start drinking more water, it's also time to start having some whole salt. But it's the fourth point that I think made a dramatic effect. It all has an effect. And that was the high intensity interval training. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you inside the cell and show you why the high intensity interval training is so effective. So this is intervals of high intensity, intervals of recovery, and it's done for a cycle. And Doug McGuff, the heart doctor, he suggests 30 seconds high intensity, 90 seconds recovery for a cycle of 6. There's 15 minutes a day. Sorry, but no excuse. If you haven't got 15 minutes, start to write down how long you're on the computer, how long are you on the phone, how long are you on your iPad, how long do you spend watching television. And you will quickly see time to do some adjustments with your time. What I want to show you is what happens inside the cell when you do the high intensity interval training. Now before I go there, just let me define high intensity. It's anything that gets the heart rate up and the breathing. So Michael and I, we run up hills every day and our recovery is walking down hills and we run up the other hill. When I was in Germany 2 weeks ago, where I was staying was in a little village and the house I stayed with was right up on the side of a hill. So anywhere I went, when I went back home, I had some high intensity. And I found a path through the forest. And I found this path by accident because when I was going on my usual road, I passed a man with a dog. And it was on a big rope and this dog was jumping, trying to get at me, barking ferociously. I was terrifying. And I thought, I got to find somewhere else to walk. I don't want to pass that dog again. And then I found this bush track. They call it a forest track. And in this forest track, I got 5 high intensities. And I wasn't even running. It was just walking. And it was a track that was made for a tractor. So it wasn't for a car, because I don't even know if a car would have got up those steep ones. So I was very happy with my track that I found, and the nasty dog didn't go on that track because it was bush. It was a track you could walk. So sometimes you don't even need to run. All I need to do was walk and walk fast up these really steep bits. Most of the research has been done on an exercise bike where the person, if they're unstable on their feet, they're holding on. It's very good if they've got hip or knee or ankle problems, then the weight is not on those areas. And you can cycle as fast as possible, and then your recovery time can just be slow cycle. It could be swimming, doing laps of the pools. It could be push-ups. I mentioned when my boys visited last April at Easter holidays, they were doing 1,000 push-ups a day. They do it 20 at a time, 20 at a time. So they were certainly doing that interval all through the day. And they got out on my back veranda and were doing the pull-ups. The recovery time is really just till you feel it's time to run again or it's time to go fast again. It doesn't have to be 90 seconds, but that's what you're aiming for. Your recovery time is an indication of your fitness. The longer you take to recover, it's usually an indicator that the more unfit you are. And if you take a long time to recover, Don't worry about it. This is progressive. That's what Al Sears' book says, progressive acceleration of cardiopulmonary exertion, pace. So as you get stronger, as your body gets fitter, you'll be able to do less recovery time. So let's have a look at what happens inside the cell. This 20-step path, when we looked at this, when we looked at the cancer, it's a very fast pathway. That's the one that consumes about 15 times the glucose of any other cell. But this 8-step pathway is slow. It's a lot slower. And as a rule, this actually feeds quite well into the 8-step pathway, but when you're doing your high intensity, and when you're getting to the end of your first stage of 30 seconds, your 20-step speeds up, your 8-step speeds up. And there's a rate-setting enzyme in there that will always keep this one faster, this one slower. And because of the higher revs of these pathways, more pyruvate is being made than can be fed in to the 8-step pathway. And so what the body does is it stores that excess pyruvate as lactic acid. We've all heard of lactic acid, haven't we? Yes. Now, I think one of the most incredible parts of this form of exercise is what I'm about to tell you. When you're in recovery time, so it's like those hills that I was going up a couple of weeks ago, because it was high and then only a little bit of recovery, I would stop and then I'd do my stretches. I'd do arm stretches or I'd do leg stretches. So recovery time is far better if you do some slow movement. In recovery time, your liver converts that lactic acid back to pyruvate. So in recovery time, you're burning just as much fuel as when you're running for your life. Because in recovery time, the liver converts the lactic acid back to pyruvate and feeds it in the powerhouse. So two things are happening there. One, you're burning just as much fuel when you're in recovery time. Two, it mops up your lactic acid. So you aren't getting a build-up of lactic acid. And that's one of the reasons why this is such a powerful form of exercise. And you will find that the majority of trainers today are training their athletes with the high-intensity interval training. Because they have found when they train with the high-intensity interval training, they have got an edge. And that's what it's all about in the competition games, in the Olympic Games, isn't it? Having an edge. I was watching in the games in Beijing. I was travelling a lot, and every time I travelled, I'd be watching it up on the screen. I love watching it, because don't we love excellence? And it was the first time they were doing a 10-kilometre swim, and it was in this big lake in Beijing. And there was it was the American, and I think the Russians were up there, but the favourite was the British girl. But she was about third or fourth. And in the last kilometre, it was just thrilling, she couldn't get past them because of the kicking of their legs. So she had to go sideways, go around them, and she won the race. And I thought, wow, was she training with the high intensity? Because they're giving it everything they've got. But it appears that this just gives an edge. And what I am very thankful to Doug McGuff for, in his book Body by Science, he goes inside the cell and he shows exactly what is happening. But there's more. When you're getting to the end of maybe your third set of high intensity, your glycogen stores have all been used up. Remember that your quick-release glucose stores, they're all getting used up. So I think possibly by the end of your third set of high intensity, you've used up your glycogen stores and you're needing more fuel. You've got 3 more to go. And the body sees that. And so it speaks to the pituitary gland to release the human growth hormone. Now, the human growth hormone is very active when we're growing. But when we stop growing, the human growth hormone goes into retirement. I stopped growing at 16, that probably doesn't surprise you. But my son William, he grew 2 inches from 19 to 22. He was very happy about that. He wondered if he'd ever grow. But when we stop growing, the human growth hormone goes into retirement. But when we're doing the high intensity exercise and the body sees that we need some more fuel, it causes a release of the human growth hormone, which stimulates a release of hormone-sensitive lipase. So what's hormone-sensitive lipase? Lipase is an enzyme that breaks down fat. And underneath the tongue, there's the sublingual glands release lingual lipase. That breaks down saturated fat. Our liver releases bile, it breaks down fat. And the pancreas releases pancreatic lipase, breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. So lipase is your fat-splitting enzyme. So why does the human growth hormone release hormone-sensitive lipase? To release the fat stores. The human growth hormone also stops the body from burning glucose as fuel and become a fat burner. We know why it becomes a fat burner because remember what fat's going to do? It's going to give more than twice the units of energy compared to glucose. And we're running for our life. This is a crisis. The human growth hormone also increases the body's ability to utilise protein. This week we've looked at the importance of eating sufficient protein. I find that people that are on this high carbohydrate diet, they're often protein deficient. Protein's an essential nutrient. We've looked at the importance of eating sufficient protein. We looked at the importance of not drinking with your meals because that waters down the enzymes that break down your protein. Now we're looking at another part, and that is when you implement the high intensity interval training, causing a release of the human growth hormone, it increases the body's ability to utilise the protein. There's more. The human growth hormone increases the circulation of the blood to the skin. Did you know that the movie stars pay $1,000 a week for this? Because their profession is dependent on them looking good. Circulation of the blood to the skin, that slows down the wrinkles, slows down ageing. Well, I'm offering it to you cut price today. 15 minutes of high-intensity interval training a day will cause a release of the human growth hormone, which will remain active for 24 hours. What a bargain. Let's compare identical twins. One's living in a rainforest, running up and down hills, got her own garden. She's a very beautiful woman, but she loves the forest. Her sister, also very beautiful, has become a model, an actress. She's taking the human growth hormone. But at the age of 40, 45, a few wrinkles are coming and she can't afford the $1,000 a week, so she stops. She ages 2 years and 6 months. She goes and visits her twin sister on the mountaintop. Let's look at these two women at the age of 60. Is there going to be a difference? Yeah. It's going to be a big difference. Maybe the 60-year-old who's been in the hills most of her life has decided to make a bit of money and go into the movies. Perhaps not. There's more important things in life than money. My sister-in-law, her name's Abigail O'Neill. She's married to my brother-in-law, my husband's brother. She started modelling at the age of 36. She's now 49. She looks 18. She looks amazing. Now, there's a bit of genetics there. She's tall, Her mother's Brazilian. She's got beautiful olive skin, the full lips. Oh, yes. She's very beautiful. Genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. She stepped into an area in modelling where there's a gap, because most models are smoking too many cigarettes and drinking too much coffee so that they don't put on weight, and the cellulitis comes, the fibromyalgia starts to come, the wrinkles start to appear, and then in steps Abigail O'Neill. One day they said to her, "We don't want a 17-year-old for this photo shoot." She said, "I'm 40. They can't believe it. They say she's the most beautiful model they've worked with. What do you think they're referring to? There are no tantrums on her set. She's always smiling, because when you live this life, it affects your mind. She's actually gone really big now. You can Google Abigail O'Neill and have a look. But she's an illustration that genetics loads the gun. Yeah, she's got the genes. But lifestyle pulls the trigger. There are many beautiful women. But by the age of 40, they're not looking beautiful anymore. They're put on weight, their body's not working well. She does this every day. In fact, her husband has built her steps at the back of their property, and she runs up and down every day. Last time I saw her was a year ago. I still can't see any wrinkles. She was born with beautiful genes, but she would not look like that today if she didn't live like this. I'm sure the wrinkles will eventually come. But I believe that God meant us to age graciously and beautifully, yeah? There's beauty at every single age. But unfortunately, many people are being robbed of quality of life, because they've been fed some lies and deceptions. And yet God's way is a way of truth. And God says in 3 John chapter 1 verse 2, he says, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospers." That's his aim. And so number 4 is exercise. Exercise causes a dramatic weight loss. And yet the beauty of implementing this is that as you lose weight, you don't get the saggy, baggy elephant effect. And John Gabriel, he wrote a book called The Gabriel Method, and he went from, I have to give it to you in kilos, he was 183 kilos, well, that would be probably nearly 400 pounds, and he lost, I think it was 100 kilos. So what's that, 200 pounds? 220. He's now 220. He's now 83 kilos. And he's got a picture of him in his school. Four photos. One where he's obese, another where he's a bit slimmer, another where he's a bit slimmer again. He did this in his 40s. And the last photo is muscular. And you can count his abdominal muscles, you know, the six-pack. And when you look, there's no hanging skin. What did he do? He did the high-intensity interval training. And he implemented this. And he implemented this. There's one other factor. And this was the mind. And he said that he used to picture his new body. Sorry, but you can't lay back on the couch eating a high carbohydrate diet and picture your new body. But it's part of it. It's having faith. Remember, God's way is built on faith and believing that you can recover. Number 6, hormones. On Friday night, I'm going to talk about hormones and the contraceptive pill, exposure to plastics, exposure to environmental poisons causes a rise in a hormone called estrogen. And estrogen is a cell proliferator. Cell proliferator means causes massive cell growth. And when a person's hormones are out of balance, it's almost impossible to lose weight. So balancing the hormones is another aspect. For some people this is an important part, for some people it's a major part, for some people it's a minor part, for some people it's not a part. So on Friday night I'll be going through some of the symptoms of a hormonal imbalance, and I'll also be showing you how to restore the balance of the hormones. Yes?
Do we need to worry about the heart rate getting too high? And that, I mean, is there a formula that we need to follow?
Yes, there is a formula, and that is breathing through the nose. Now, it's going to be very difficult, but you'll be able to train yourself to breathe in and out through the nose. Because when you breathe in and out through the nose and breathe low, slow and deep, you stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your peaceful, calming nervous system. So if you do the high intensity interval training and you're breathing in and out through the mouth, that stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight and flight, and that actually intensifies the heart. So long, remember God's LSD? We looked at God's LSD today. Long, slow, deep. Long, slow, deep. It takes a bit of training, and you feel like you're dying, and you feel like you're not getting enough air, but the fact is, when you breathe in and out through your nose, it opens the little tubes at the back of your nose, and it balances your blood gases, so your cell, and this is where we need the oxygen, is here. Some people who are breathing in and out through their mouth, they're getting a lot of oxygen into the blood, but it can't get into the cell. Because when they breathe in and out through their mouth, they lose carbon dioxide, too much carbon dioxide. 4 molecules of carbon dioxide will allow 4 molecules of oxygen to go in. So nose breathing. So if ever you feel your heart breathing a bit fast, close your mouth. Go low, slow and deep through the nose, and you'll find that that will calm. That will calm. Try 5 seconds in, hold for 3, 5 seconds out. Try that 10 times, and that will often calm it down. Rome wasn't built in a day. You'll get there. We'll have a break now. It's almost 7:15, and we're going to come back at 7:30. That's about 17 minutes.